everyone, this is Adam Dewhurst, and this is my time-lapse video sculpt of a dragon bust in Forger on an iPad Pro. So this is actually about, it's about a 45-minute video, but that's double time, so the actual process is about an hour and a half. I've been getting quite a few comments of people asking a bit more about the process. So thank you to those who've been subscribing to my YouTube videos and leaving me some comments and some feedback. So I thought I'd better do a video with some commentary. So what we've got here is basically, it's literally just what I would do anytime it's just getting stuck in sculpting something very loose, very free. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I use Forger and settings and all that stuff. But just to get straight into the meat of it, I've started here by, I saw a great image on Instagram of that dragon illustration you can see there, saved it, and I've imported it into my background as a reference. It's really, really key to work from reference, I find, because in often case I could be dabbling around in here, you know, void of ideas. Now I'm not going to make that exact dragon, but it's a great reference for me to start noodling away with making something. So I'm working from a sphere. I do sometimes use primitives to block out a shape, and there's some other videos on my channel that go into detail on how to do that. But in this case, I'm just going to start with a sphere because it's really just a bust shape, and it's going to be pretty quick and easy. I've got symmetry on, and the main tools that I'm using at this point are just the move brush and the clay brush. So I use the clay brush in the same way you'd use clay build-up in ZBrush. I'm just using it to quickly build forms. I find it is often quicker at doing that more specific work than the move brush is. I'm not a fan of that kind of lumpy, toothpastey look you get with the move brush, or with any move brush really. So I often would prefer to use a clay or a clay build-up brush. So it just allows me to very roughly and crudely essentially paint in the shape I want. So, and you can see that's exactly what's happening here on screen. And the great thing about Forger is that I pretty much work with the pen, and then I have my left hand hovering over the toolbox on the left hand side of the screen, and I'll just hold down smooth, or I'll hold down the invert button and very quickly just push the mesh in and out. So already we can see here that this dragon sculpt is taking shape quite quickly. And again, having that reference in the background allows me to just sculpt without overly thinking about it too much. And as I say, I'm not going to match it 100%, but it's a great guide for me to just start blocking something in. That's super helpful. Now what I've done here is quickly make a sphere. Now my rule of thumb tends to be that if an object is going to be a different material, you should probably make it a different geometry as well. I find with eyeballs and teeth in particular that I will do a better job of sculpting around them, almost using them like reference, like a locked geometry reference, but sculpting around them than I would if I was going to actually sculpt an eyeball on the mesh. I know some people work differently, they like to have it all as one sculpt, but you know, normally with a bust I'll only make a couple of objects anyway, so in this case I've made a sphere to use as the eyeball, and it just allows me to sculpt out that eyeball shape really quickly. Now pop the second one in. I'm pretty sure that's, yeah, I'm going to use that as a reference for the horn. So obviously with the eyeball itself, I won't need to remesh that. With this one, I'm going to use the pull function just to quickly play with some shapes. As I said earlier, I'm not matching the reference in the background, but I just want a kind of twisted horn. One of the things I want to explore with it actually later down the line is better ways of making this sort of thing, because I'm really just, you know, yanking out that shape and then running a remesh. So here what I'm doing is using pinch, using move, smooth, just trying to get a nice elegant curve on it. And you'll notice my camera panning around, and again that's mostly just so I can find, you know, so I can look at it from multiple angles and make sure that, like, it looks great there side on right now, but is it going to look okay if I look at it from the front? So I'm going to run a quick remesh, and I can run that relatively low. It looks quite good from on top. Just checking out the different angles. Now you can see there's that little bump from the front, so Might be nice to correct that or inflate the bottom possibly, but it just needs a little more shaping. So now I'm adding a ridging. So again, what if I was doing this in ZBrush, I would probably do this in a more procedural way, with a radial symmetry and then like a curve deformer or something. Obviously Forge's tools are not quite as sophisticated, so I'm just going to sculpting a whole lot of ridges. And what I'm doing now before I start to build up my skin around that piece is I'm just going to rotate it with the transform tools, see if I can't find a more satisfying angle, and when I'm happy with it, I'll start to build up a shape around it. Again, mostly with clay buildup. And I'm keeping symmetry on for now. I'm going to keep it on for a while until I start doing the detail. So yeah, it's at this point it's pretty much a continued case of blocking in those forms, that basic shape. I quite like sculpting and keeping it sort of quite muddy, because sometimes you can create, sort of a happy accident in these shapes, and I'm a big fan of that sort of free flow happy accident type style of sculpting, and I'll often use things like the crease brush and the clay brush to just quickly block in a more interesting shape, so it's not like super smooth. And then if I see something that hits it nicely with the light, and you can see me doing a bit of this now, where I'm literally just putting sort of brush marks down. Sometimes I'll do something and think, oh, that hint of a crease there or hint of a shape there's nice, and I'll enhance that later on. So particularly with things like dragons or dinosaurs, stuff like that, where I'm not sure where skin folds might be, I'll just sort of make some brush strokes and throw them down and see what might give the hint of a roll of skin or some sort of anatomy, because this is ultimately a fictional character. In the back of my mind, I might be thinking of other real creatures, Komodo dragons, that sort of thing, but ultimately this is really more of a creative exercise, and less of a study exercise. So I'm just trying to create something that looks interesting. Now in the reference I've got, it's got quite a lot of spikes. This I find can be a little tricky, because things like spikes, I would be tempted to do them as a different material, but that's going to take me way too long to lay all those out. So in this case, I'm just going to sculpt it into the main form. I made the mistake years ago of making a character where I separated out all the spikes, and it made the rigging and the deformation really difficult. So I tend to find that with these creatures, you should probably just make those sorts of, not the big horn on him or the teeth, but those sorts of spiky flesh. I would just make that part of the mesh and then use masks and actual texture map values. If you were to take this through a full VFX pipe, have different values of roughness and speck and bump to stand that out as a different material. So here we go, just plotting away with it. Now my reference, I could have that bigger, I could have that more center, but what I tend to do with my reference images is just move them off to the left or the right, just to get them on the side of the screen, so I can use the full screen to sculpt, and I can just see that in the background. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's a reference. I'm not plotting to match it exactly. And certainly in my reference folder, if I'm doing a likeness of someone, or if I'm a rough likeness, I prefer to have multiple different images I can just drag in and put on one side and look at than to do full-on lineups. Okay, so most of my clay build-up stuff is done now. So at this point, what I'm doing is running through with the crease brush, and kind of what I said earlier, looking for those happy accidents, those shapes where I can enhance it and say, well, okay, this is a nice crease, so I'm going to work on that. And I almost use that crease brush like a pencil sometimes, where I can use it to define certain areas and draw in, because then I can sculpt on top of that later. So here I'm using it to sort of draw out some very rough scales, and get an idea for, is this how scaly this creature is going to be and where they might lie. Some of these I'll rub out and do again later, but as I say, I'm using it like a pencil, very rough, very quick, just to plot something in. And again, this goes back to that workflow I talked about, where everything is very loose, very sort of this kind of free flow, what's the best word? I'm stalling for words. Free form, that's the word I was looking for, sorry. Free form, loose and free, just not really thinking about it, just working very, very naturally. Something about that, the stuff I'm building around the horn, I didn't like, and I come back and redo that later. I still think I was happy with it in the end, actually. I felt like I wanted a more natural way to fit that horn into the head, and I'm not sure I ultimately achieved it. So at this point, I'm using the clay tool to build up some of those scales in the same way that I had used the crease brush earlier. So it's really just about drawing in, and you can see me zoom in a little more. I did the eye earlier. Looks like I'm coming back to do that again. So it's very much at this point about saying, right, I've got a rough form. What's the detail on this thing? And I'll go a certain distance with this before I get to a point where I want to use things like stamps to get that finer detail. The great thing about where Nomad and Forger are at the moment is that you can have the benefit of using alpha maps to create that fine detail. So it's not like it all has to be completely hand sculpted. That being said, I do think the crease brush is great, and I will use that to do wrinkles and creases and things like that. So now that I've started to sort of, you can see I drew in a kind of eyelid using the crease brush. I'm just reshaping that eyelid shape so it sits around the eyeball a bit better. And again, drawing with the clay build-up, just trying to, that particular spot where his cheek is a bit devoid of detail. So it's a lot of just sort of messily painting in, smoothing back down, seeing what you get. I think the workflow that is probably best for things like Forger and Nomad at the moment is it's a great tool to concept, and then you could easily take this into, you could take it into Maya and retopo, but I would probably retopo in Maya or in ZBrush, and then project that all back down in ZBrush, and then go for a full-on texture pass. I know Nomad, the texturing's pretty good, but personally I'm still a big fan of Forger. I do most of my iPad sculpting in Forger. I quite like the simplicity of its interface, so it works really well for me. If you're interested in the setup that I'm rocking here, it's an iPad Pro 2017, so it's not really anywhere near the newer models. I'm using the first generation of Apple Pencil. So this is not a power cruncher in terms of what it's using. I do have to shut down my other apps while I'm running it. Well, I don't have to, but I tend to, just to make it run a bit better. But even on an older model, this works pretty well. It works fine for me. So I am surprised at how robust this app is. Years ago, I did an assessment of this when I had an iPad Mini, and I found Forger crashed a lot, but it's really stable now. And having that little circle in the top right that tells you how much of your processing power effectively you're using is super helpful, because once that goes really red, you've pushed it to the max. So yeah, just noodling away at the mouth. I'm going to get a slightly more interesting curve. I quite like how wide this guy's jaw is. I always like to give my dragons a bit of sort of neck waddle. So you can see I've added that in from the profile here. Just subdividing some of my meshes there. And again, that back bit, I didn't like the scales I'd done there. I just felt like the whole thing should be built up a bit more. So just sort of rubbing that out, starting to try and fix that a little bit. Again, painting with clay effectively to try and build that up. I don't know what it was. I don't like scales that just sit around in. They need to sort of ramp down, and around that horn I've just got this ring of scales. You can see on the head crest they sort of come together, which makes sense. But certainly around the horn it's just like a ring of scales, which I'm never a fan of. I think they need to sort of fade off into smaller scales. So I'm just cleaning up some of the horns. This sort of the mohawk on the middle here. they look a little lumpy. But again, this is really just a sort of sculpting exercise. At this point, I've just decided I'm no longer referring to the reference, so I turned it off. And you can do that in your, what is effectively the outliner. I think it lists it as, it's not layers, but it's sort of my scene setup. So this I struggled a bit here because genuinely I hadn't updated Forger for a bit. I updated it and I forgot how to mirror my mesh. I was trying to mirror the horn and the eyeball here, and it took me a little while to push that in. So it's always important to stay on top of the software you're using. But yeah, I got there in the end. So it just took a couple of tries. Certainly, I would say at this point it looks like I've got a good blocking of everything. The horns definitely need some detail work, but I think proportionally it's working. And again, if you got to a point where the reference you're just not looking at it or not using it, then do away with it because it's only going to be a distraction. It's quite nice to have that full background so you can start to look at the silhouette of your character. Certainly from the side this works quite well. From the front, you know, I mean, I'd have to have the whole dragon really, but from the front I feel like those center horns could be a bit better. But yeah, here we go. Look, I've managed to mirror an eye. Let's see if I can't do the horn as well. And this is also why I sped this video up to double speed, because you certainly don't want to sit there while I'm faffing around with this for 10 minutes. But yeah, as I said, this was an hour and a half roughly in total, probably nearing the halfway point here. It was 2 sessions, one 50 minutes and then one about 35. And that's the great thing with Forger and Nomad is you can just sit on the couch, do away with it. And I can tell you right now, if I had a dragon project and I was busy, which normally I am with my normal work day, I would happily just concept with this in the evenings, and then it would be a doddle to throw this into ZBrush and retopo. So yeah, great tool. Can't really praise it enough. Great, there we go. Finally managed it. And normally what I'll do if I've mirrored something is I'll combine it, because ultimately I'm still developing this with a symmetry on. With things like horns, I will turn that symmetry off later. I like to make, because they're so large, it makes sense to make them distinctive. But I know that this still looks a bit lumpy. So while I'm still blocking in some shape, I've set it to symmetrical. So again, I'm going to use the crease brush here to start drawing it in. I'm trying to give this some more ridges, and I'm thinking ridges along its length. And I feel like this might help it sit in as well at the back a bit better. So I'm going to smooth out some of that, some of this stuff that I did earlier, just try to let it sit together a bit better. I need to get some new alphas for this actually. I have a stock set of alphas I use that are generally a sort of a leathery lizard skin and a frog skin. But I use them so much, it shows how invaluable working with alphas are. You'll see me pick that up in this session shortly. But yeah, again, the crease brush, basically using it to draw, and then remesh it, more subdividing the look of it. Yeah. Normally, it's funny, the crease, dam standard was something ZBrush introduced to address the fact that they needed something better than the is it the slice tool or the Mudbox has the knife tool. They're both rubbish, but dam standard does a better job of it, and creased in Forger is really nice as well. Normally when I was using Mudbox back in the day, I would create my own crease brush, because they actually ships with an alpha that does a very similar fall off to this. So again, building up that area at the back, that you can see how getting rid of some of those scales I think helped the design a little bit. But again, it's just pretty loose, just trying to look at it from different angles, feel it out. And now I'm coming into that forehead region, and I'm looking for areas that are void of detail that I possibly haven't thought about too much. So there's that area above the eye. Now I'm looking back at the sort of back of the neck. Yeah, I think it's important not to focus detail in one area, so I can see that area under the cheek needs work. For example, I've not really looked at the front of the mouth. I'm just detailing up the nose. And it might just be a little fluctuation, a little undulation to the surface, but again, the primary tool here is always that clay tool. And it'll be my primary tool in all sculpting packages, the clay brush. It's incredibly versatile. It feels the most like you're working with a real clay. So again, looking for areas to dress up. And there are some really nice happy accidents here happening, along the snouts, and those are the things that I'm now going to come in with a smaller version of the clay build-up and just try and enhance a bit. So by keeping it loose and free, you sort of free yourself up to find things creatively and enhance them, pick them out, and then, I'll either add creases or I'll paint on top. I quite liked that sort of stretched skin, almost like a venomy, veiny thing, so pulling that out at the front, now trying to define a bit more of a lower lip. And I know there's sort of folds happening on that chin there, but again, it's a fictional character, so you can get creative with it. I'm not sure I'd call them folds, though. I'm thinking of that as more sort of a leathered skin, I guess. Yeah. Exactly, just trying to detail it now. So this is no longer blocking. This is now, adding some shape and some, I don't know, just actual sculpting effectively. Looking at the stuff we roughed in and trying to build it up. So it's more of a practical. This is where anatomy knowledge is great, of course, because so now I'm looking at this thinking, right, this is my folds of skin, so I'm going to come and try and give that a bit more rhyme and reason. So I'm trying to have some looser bits in the middle, just marry that design to the underside of the chin, and keep sort of noodling that together. Oh, there we go. Save. I have had lost files. I know I said Forge is a lot more stable. It is, but it can crash. So just be saving as much as possible. And I would say do a couple of save as, make a couple of additional copies. You can always come back and clean them out later, just in case one gets corrupted. I've had that where I've spent many hours on something and then the whole file got corrupted. So definitely make copies if you can. There's a save as function, so maybe if you've been doing several sessions on one thing, just make a backup. Now this is quite fun. So because I've used the crease brush to make some of these scales, I'm using the inflate brush now to just sort of try and pull them out a little bit. Okay, cool. And this was one of the last things I did on the first session, is I decided that I did want some teeth showing. So I'm going to use this like I did the eyeball. Now normally I would genuinely make all individual teeth, but I felt like since I was going to make a small grouping, I could probably sculpt them all from one blobby thing together. So this was me trying to do effectively 4 spiky teeth out of one thing. It worked alright. I just used the pull brush to pull out the basic sheep teeth forms, and then I used clay buildup, and now I'm using the crease brush to try and crease that in. And I'll just pull and push this. It just saved me from doing one tooth 4 times. I just sculpted it all as one thing and roughly placed it. I'm pretty sure later on I added a couple more. But again, if I put this in and I think, right, that's roughly where I want those teeth, now I can reshape the skin around it so that it's responding to, essentially the intersection of another piece of geometry. And you ever look at crocodile teeth, crocodile jaws, you'll notice that their skin molds around the teeth because the teeth sort of, they interlink, they crisscross when they close the jaw. So here I'm just trying to define, I'm masking off to try and define each one a bit more separately. And that's another thing people overlook. There is masking in Forge. It's available. It's its own brush as opposed to being a shortcut. So again, another really useful tool. Effectively works the same as the freeze brush does in Mudbox. I don't know why I'm banging on about Mudbox so much, but it's a shame it hasn't been maintained in the same rate as ZBrush has. But it's still a perfectly valid tool. I find if you're going to say you're a sculptor, you should be competent in any sculpting package, although I acknowledge that most people use ZBrush, and I do. That's my primary package. But I just still think that I always ask people when I interview people for roles, what package you use. You know, can you use Mudbox? So I think it's important. What if you're stuck in a studio that doesn't have ZBrush? God forbid. But yeah. So this is probably definitely coming up to where I wrapped. In fact, actually no. This is actually the beginning of the second session. I can see on the timeline. So this was me picking it up with fresh eyes the next day and just cleaning up and going, right, well, what am I going to do with this? So I started working in on the skin and working out, giving that a little bit more creasing, a little bit more detail, trying to fold that around the teeth. So again, drawing with the crease brush. I mean, none of this should seem like it's particularly revolutionary workflow. It's very basic stuff. You can see that crease, move, and clay are my primary tools, and then periodically I might dive in with a couple of other things, but it's very loose and free and very much about conceiving your idea and just keeping it fun, really. Yeah, so more clay build up on the lips. Again, that was an area that was a bit devoid. I quite like to have that overhang on the upper lip, so it just hangs over the lower lip a little bit more, sits together nicer. Started to name my meshes so I can keep the scene nice and neat. That's really important. The automatic naming, sphere, combined mesh, whatever, that's going to get tiresome really quick and hard to track what you're doing. So just neatening stuff up by naming stuff. And then again here, this is more of a detail. This is where we're getting into that detail pass now. Going to come in and actually start to go, right, well, how does this... Let's stop with the happy accidents now. Let's start actually sculpting in what I want this lip to look like. So yeah. Now back to the teeth. Another remesh on those. Just try to keep them. I'm having an issue. I said earlier I wanted to do it without making multiple teeth meshes. I did have an issue with trying to make them look separate. I kept seeing the underlying connection. So that was frustrating, and it really is just laziness. I probably should have just done them as separate teeth. It would have been a bit easier. And what this is missing, I was beginning to think at this point, what this is missing is just a couple of teeth pointing upwards as well. As I said earlier, with crocodile teeth, how they interlink, and so these are all downward facing, and I felt like, right, well, there's got to be a couple coming the other way. So I did this with a different methodology. I masked off, and then I extracted from that mesh instead of putting in a new one. You can see there that's on my object, and there you go, extract mesh. I didn't actually play with it. I should have ramped up the thickness. You can see I've made it there, and it's really small. But again, I just needed something in the right place, so I just ran an inflate, and then I remeshed it. I just wanted to have the right piece in the right place, because I knew I could use pull or push. So there we go. That just gives me the tooth in the right place. I've still got my skin mask. I'm gonna have to undo that in a minute. But yeah, I just felt like we needed a couple more just to balance it a little bit. Now, again, if I was realizing this as a more full concept, I wouldn't lay these out as symmetrically, which is what I'm doing. But again, this is just something quick and fun on the couch. Really easy. So yeah, now that I've placed them in the right place, I'm going to come back, unmask what I've masked, and now again I can adjust my my skin to sit around. There you go, bit of sculpting around those teeth. Just sort of makes the whole thing, the building the skin around the teeth. There's a certain logic to it, It just gives it that edge of realism. I do enjoy doing a dragon. You'll see on my Instagram account there's quite a few dragons. I think that's just fun. For those of you looking for more guides on mobile sculpting, I presume anyone watching this will know this, but Glenn Southern Southern GFX, I think, is his YouTube account. He's got some great videos on Forger and on Nomad, so definitely give that a watch. I'll post this on a couple of his groups actually, probably, but he's got some really good guides, and he's just done a really amazing T-Rex, which I believe he's releasing as a course. So go check out Southern GFX and check out his YouTube channel as well, because he's got some great stuff. If you like dragons and T-Rexes, who doesn't? So yeah, this is definitely getting close to a point where I'm going to start looking at the finer detail. I'm not happy with the horns at this point. I'm just mirroring my teeth so they appear fully on the other side. I will run a remesh or merge them all together. Run a remesh so nice and clean. The teeth are all one thing. Up the divisions a bit. I haven't sculpted any detail on the teeth. They really are just spiky pieces at this point. So that remesh wasn't a particularly high one, but again, now I've got them in my scene nice and clean. So I think that's all the elements done. I have in the past sometimes added collars to dragons. It's quite nice, I think, having that hard surface link. But yeah, this is just an exercise in doing a bust. So I think that's all my different geometry in there now. So what are we going to do next? I think it's sometimes good just to take stock, have a quick look at what you've done, see what there is left to do. I felt like a couple of my scales here were, I don't know, just a little lumpy. So I'm coming in and doing a second pass, a slightly more considered pass with the crease tool. Just sort of separating anything that looked too big, drawing it out, and again trying to link it back to those top forms, so there's a certain logic to the whole thing, so it's not just haphazard. So I mean, I very much start, there's nothing wrong with haphazard. I always start haphazard, and then I'll come in and start to think, right, okay, let's try to make sense of this now. So I'm just trying to, as I said earlier, I prefer it when scales fade off naturally to a smaller size rather than just abruptly end. So I'm just trying to add that into the snout, reduce these down a little bit. If I'd had more time on this, I think I would have styled out the ones over the eyebrow a little bit better. They're a little inconsistent in size, but it's fine. It's loose, it's free, it's a concept. I'm going to pick out the horns as well a bit because they felt a bit loose as well. There are parts in this where I think it's just I just pause and think, wait, hang on. Okay, let's have a look. What needs work? Yeah, it's quite useful. I know with drawing in Photoshop and concepting, there's a technique of flipping your image, reversing it from left to right, and it just gives you a new perspective on it. So obviously with this I've got a full three-dimensional object, so it's just taking a moment to breathe it in and see, right, okay. I'm still not happy with that back bit. Just trying to build it up into something, but I think even when I finished I wasn't happy with it. It's I think with if I'd had more of a neck, like a fuller form, I might have. Yeah, this was the idea here. I think it was, okay, well, if my neck shape isn't completely oval, maybe that you can sense there's a muscle or something back there, and then the horn is mounted at the base of the skull. I think that was the notion, is just trying to build it up so it sits on a bigger block of flesh, and that would have room, I guess, for that amount of bone in there. I think that was the reasoning. I'm going to say that's the reasoning. It sounds logical, right? So yeah. And again, back with the crease brush, picking out the horns now, trying to make sense of what I have blocked in. So there's a definite process. It's loose and free and paintbrushy, and then coming back and sort of working out how that works. I honestly rarely approach something with a complete idea. If it's a fictional thing, I rarely will approach it with a complete idea of how I want to do it. Not how I want to do it, what I want to make, essentially. I like the creative process. Working it out as I go. So again, this is back to picking out some of those scales that I drew in earlier. using clay to work on top of the stuff that I've drawn out with the crease brush. And you can see slowly we're removing those areas void of detail. Slowly that's all getting, worked up as we just look at it. And the other thing is I'm not focusing my detail in one area, I'm moving around. And the reasoning is that I don't want to forget about any areas. I want to make sure that I constantly sculpt on the whole thing and not focus all my attention in one zone. Because you can unbalance your model that way. So I'm constantly trying to work the whole thing up. Yeah, I felt like that region there above the head wasn't working. Don't know whether it all wanted to be scales or it wanted to be something else, so I'm still trying to work that one out. It looks nice from the profile here, but it didn't look great from above. So again, that area around the eyelid is a little simplistic, so using crease to try and define something in there. I still need work on that cheek. That's still pretty simple, but the rest of it seems to be, yeah, I think generally speaking, I really like the stuff I've done over the snout. I've sort of sculpted in that skin fold. That's looking really nice. So yeah, I think it's definitely coming together at this point. The horns, still not happy with the horns, but again, that's what I get for quickly boshing in some form of ridging without really thinking about it too hard. In the end, I think I get away with it by using an alpha, but it's effectively cheating. I didn't really give it the time it deserved. So at this point, I was trying to sort of sculpt in something like the snout on the back, but it wasn't really working. So I was trying to give that same stretched skin feeling. I'm not sure if that worked. So yeah, as I said, the horns weren't working, so I'm now trying to, I don't know, just sort of balance that a bit better by sculpting up some of these more prominent ridges. Again, I went into this with the idea that it would only be an hour or a little bit over an hour. So if I find that I'm working at something and I'm clearly going to need more time, then it's essentially it's not fit for purpose. So I've got to remember in the back of my head, this is really just a quick concept exercise. It's not about having the perfect shaped horns or getting that process down. It's very quick fire and loose, and that's our point. And the way I learned ZBrush was by doing a 20-minute sculpt every morning and just keeping it pretty simple and just getting into that repetition. Here you can see exactly what I said. I have a bunch of alphas. This one's a kind of a leathery, cracky type alpha map, and I was just like, right, I'm going to cheat it. So I just threw that in, and the process here is that I throw it in to get some nice, forms, and I'll come back in with the crease brush and I'll turn symmetry off at some point. I believe I turned it off. And just try to pick out some of those nicer shapes. So I'm going to try and make that kind of cracked, I guess it would be not an ivory, but a sort of a bone or something, but certainly a cracked horn shape. So here I'm working on them independently now, and I'm pulling these stamps down quite large because I really want to create those large indents that I can then pick out some of them and sort of interlink some of them using the crease brush and try to make something that works a little bit better than my slightly lumpy ridges that I sculpted in the first place. I probably could have not bothered with the ridges at all, but they make quite a nice underlying shape here. So yeah, again, loose, free, quick. I think that works better with what I've done there, and then I'll do something slightly different on the other horn. I'm not going to bother going all the way to the tip. It's really just that 3/4 view from the front. I'm just trying to work up something here and see what we can get away with. And then once I've done the creasing, I'll come in with clay and build up in the reverse way, essentially build up on top of that. And I think that balance works quite well. You can see I'm adding a sort of diagonal slant on one of them because these would have grown like nails or like teeth, so they would have grown and gnarled in their own different way. it would have been nice, I think, to get the move brush in and just, shift one of them a little bit so they haven't grown identically. But again, as I said, quick exercise, knocking in the concept. So look, those are some of the alpha maps I use. So I'm flicking through, seeing which one I might like. They're generally sort of creaturey. I've got a couple of hard surface in there from something I was testing out, but I'm just going to throw some of these down and see which ones I like. This is quite a good one for that kind of what would I call that? I don't know. It's kind of a pimply, large pore based skin. It's good for monsters and stuff. I used it on a Ninja Turtle design at one point. So again, just going to lay that down in places. And then this is a really nice sort of frog skin pattern that I have. Again, great for dinosaurs, that sort of thing. So I'm just making sure I'm on my highest subdivision level, because with this detail, I'm going to want it, on a higher level. And I'm putting it on a little bit lighter here, so you can see it, but it's not overwhelming, because I like the stuff I've sculpted. And there you go, turned off symmetry, so I can add this a little bit more asymmetrical. I mean, normally I would spend more time doing an asymmetry pass, changing stuff up, some of the scales, particularly down that middle line, but at this point we've just, I've raced ahead to the alpha stuff. I probably laid these alphas down a little bit too soon, actually. But again, at this point, I said the total runtime for this is an hour and a half, so we're well past the point that I was aiming to be at. But still, the reason I went over is because I was enjoying it. It's quite a satisfying creature to make. So again, looking at some other alphas, seeing if I can't get some different type of detail in that. I think I was looking for something a little more creasy to go by the lips and stuff. And then I ended up doing some of that with the crease brush anyway. Again, having the alpha in the same way I did the horns, having the alpha map down there, it sort of gives me a little something to work around, something to guide it. So I use that as a cue to come back and do. I couldn't find anything to do the lips like I wanted, so I came back in and did some creasing manually. Yeah, there we go. That's quite fun and stuff. It's quite therapeutic in a funny way, just sort of manually sculpting that in. So hopefully, there's a bit more of this left, but hopefully you guys won't have found this too boring and found it interesting. If you like the commentary, give me a shout. I'll happily do some more of these. Yeah, happy to share. Happy to keep these videos coming. So let me know. If it's too long, give me a shout. If it's too short, give me a shout. 45 minutes is a lot to sit through, and this is at double speed. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see if I take this any further. But yeah, here we go with the detail. I mean, this is kind of where it gets really satisfying, You've got something that looks quite cool, and you're just adding that fine detail, noodling away. I mean, I could genuinely do this for hours. The only downside with the iPad is I find, one of the reasons it's in 2 sessions is because you do get a bit of back pain. I have to prop myself up normally with this on both knees and with a cushion behind me, and just set it up so it's comfortable, because otherwise you can noodle away for an hour and find you're in agony. But it's easy at this point just to get a bit carried away. This crease brush stuff, I could genuinely be doing this for hours. So yeah, it's definitely coming up. I think coming up to the end. This is your detail pass. It would have been nice to get some textures on it, maybe, or maybe just sculpt in a quick eye. But again, for the purposes of the exercise, I think this is working pretty well. And then that's again just me pulling out, thinking, is there anywhere else on this that could just have a little more love? Any more blank areas? Try to give that same level of detail around it. I can tell you right now that the back of the neck is obviously, there's nothing there, but I'm only really planning to show this from that front 3/4. Just looking around it, working out, Have I got it all? Yeah, I think so. It's definitely down to noodling now. Yeah, I had a little look at some of the, did I want to throw on any other materials? And I think I stopped after a while because it's quite nice leaving this just in grey. So yeah, that's it. There we go. Brilliant. Alrighty. So as I say, let me know if you want to see some more of these. It's a lot of fun, and hopefully I'll record more of them. Don't forget to save your files, share, join the, I think it's the GFX Facebook iPad sculpting group. That's what I'm on. Again, Glenn Southern, who runs that, has got some great videos, nice little Facebook group. I'm also on Instagram under @DewhurstAdam, so you can follow a lot of my Forger posts there. And yeah, keep following the channel, and hopefully I'll do some more of these vids. Alright guys, thanks a lot. Thanks for watching.